Hey Andrew, got your carburetors here, and when you drop them off, I did the initial check on them, and they are just worn out carburetors. And I think you've done as much as you can to help them, and but there's just no hope for these carburetors. So let's go over the basics of the carburetors. They idle and run on the first barrel of each carburetor up until about 3,000 RPM, depends on vacuum. Then the vacuum signal comes from here, opens up this diaphragm, and opens up the second barrel. So until that time, the car is only idling on the first barrel. The second barrel of each carburetor is supposed to be closed and not processing any air. And by that, I mean you've got your synchrometer here, and typically the minimal amount of air that should be processed is around 2 on this scale right here. So when you put this on here to measure airflow, it should not move much above 2, 2.5. And that would be the factory settings. When we machine these things, we give them to the point where they don't even move down, the needle doesn't even move. And same over here. Now then, in order to get these balanced, each throat here, when for idling purposes, should be pulling the same amount of air. So typically these would be idling around 5 or 6 on the scale right here. And so in my tuning of these things, I find that this one wants to vary the most. You can set it at 5 or 6 in 1 minute, and the next minute it's going to be at 10. And that's because the throttle plate in here is wiggling around, and the shafts are loose. Also, back on the second barrels being inactive up until the vacuum opens them up, that means the idle mixture screw back here is supposed to be closed completely. And as you may know, that you had some of these open trying to help it to idle, and the reason for that is because you're processing too much air through here. Therefore you've got to use your idle mixture screw to help it idle properly, when in fact this idle mixture screw should be closed off completely, and all the activity should be done adjusting on the idle mixture screw on the first barrel of each carburetor. And as you know, you should be able to close this thing all the way down and kill the engine, and that's not the case. These things are the holes here are bypassing too much air. They're all boogered up, and the throttle plates are leaking, the shafts are leaking, and there's really not much a person can do with them. And I will demonstrate that. So while we're idling, we want to see if we get the uniform airflow through here, so these are balanced. Check the minimum amount of airflow going through here, and then I'm going to spray B12 around everywhere and show you where all the leaks are taking place, and then also demonstrate the that the idle mixture screws here are not closed off completely, because if they do, the engine's going to die, because again, you're processing air that is what we would call unmetered air. It's not supposed to be going through there, and but since it is going through there, it needs the idle mixture screws dialed in to help to give it the proper amount of fuel, because otherwise you're running a lean mixture by just pumping by just going raw air into the intake manifold, bypassing the first barrel, which is where your metering is supposed to be taking place. So you've got to turn into a lean situation, and but that's not the 100% the case, because these things are running super rich, because they're nothing is fitting properly inside. So it's a real nightmare. Alright, first thing you have to do is get these things warmed up, and we're already up to temperature because I've been adjusting them already. And then you adjust, well, first of all, let's just check where all the leaks are right here. You hear this speeding up when it pulls in at B12. There we go again. So every throttle shaft is leaking. So everything is leaking. Well, now we disconnect the carburetors so they are running independently of each other. And I'll hold this so we don't have a runaway carburetor. So let's check our airflow. Right there we're at 5. A little bit above 5. Alright, on the second barrel we're running 3.5, 4. And right here, 3.5, 4. No, that's 5 right there. So put this back on here. And let's see if we can make a difference in terms of the second barrels by pushing on the counterweight over here, artificially closing them. So that's how much they're leaking. This one won't even close down at all. So you have no hope whatsoever of making these things work properly. And as I said, we got the idle mixture screws open here to help it idle. And this should not be open, so this should be closed off. Engine should not run. I mean, this should be closed off and the engine should still be idling. So we come over here to the first barrel, close this off completely, and the engine is still idling. So these make almost no effect whatsoever. There we go. When we get finished machining these things, you can turn these about 1/8 of a turn and it affects the performance of the engine. This is huge amount of dialing around. It is closed off. Now we got too high of an idle. How much this changed. And we're still at 6. 5.5, 6. 3.5, 4. That's 5. So. About as good as they're going to run, in my opinion. As long as you can put up with a high idle. Make sure it's not a linkage issue. Dialed back on the idle screws. dialed back on the idle screw and the idle went up. This one went down to 3.5. Let's see if we can get this one to come down. Nope. Nope. That's an indication of how worn out the throttle shaft is. I'm pulling up on the throttle as much as possible, and the airflow is actually increased. You got that good acceleration because you're already halfway running on the second barrel. So all I can tell you is this is as good as they're going to get until you get a rebuild on them.